Well, Drew, we brought a fast chip to the iPad. Does that make it a pro device now? Not quite. You still got some things you gotta add. Okay, it has Type-C. Does that make it a pro device now? Well, that's good, but not quite there. Right, it's got ProMotion. How about now? That's amazing, and I'm glad for that, but it's not quite... Okay, we'll give it an M1 chip and more RAM. Okay, that's good. Have you tried LumaFusion? I think this is really a pro device. Yeah, I like LumaFusion, but there's still some people that are gonna need... What's a mini LED? 2 terabytes of storage? Do you need DaVinci Resolve? We can get DaVinci Resolve. Does that make it a pro device? Can it replace your laptop now? Craig, it's not just one thing. What's it need? What's the one thing? How come we can't ever satisfy you guys? Look, it's not you. It's me. I feel like I'm getting dumped. How sad is that? So Tailosive Tech Plus members watched me struggle yesterday as I downloaded DaVinci Resolve, and I've seen lots of different channels that got the beta program where they tested it on their M1 or M2 iPad Pros. So they got the fully unlocked, fully optimized version, whereas I was kind of the goofy kid in the back of the classroom that was trying to put DaVinci Resolve on my 4 gigabytes of RAM A12X iPad Pro, which it's not ideal for, I know, but this was a common question. A lot of people were like, can DaVinci Resolve work on non-M1 iPads? And it can. Basically, you need an A12 chip to run it, which this has the A12X, which I've often referred to as M1 Lite. So I was curious how it was going to go, but I didn't have the highest of expectations. And I should just preface from the beginning that this is an incredibly capable program for a free app that you can download on basically any recent generation iPad. They brought over a lot of the color correction tools, and I'm not used to seeing so many graphs and analytics when it comes to color science on an iPad, so that's all great, and the fact that it gives you so much control over your timeline and layers and all that, maybe I'm less easily impressed because I actually ran my YouTube channel off of the original 2015 iPad Pro. That was before we had Type-C, that was before we had mouse support, and I was doing it all with the Apple Pencil 1 and a much slower chip than we have now, and I know that for the past 7 years, the iPad has been capable of doing the basics with video editing, right? So I've also toyed around with LumaFusion. I've edited videos with LumaFusion in the past, and I know that when it comes to the essentials, yes, the iPad has been capable of doing that, but our big problem that I've been complaining about for years is just that the iPad Pro is continuously getting better and better hardware, but the software has basically stagnated, and now Apple is falling back on third parties to kind of catch up the slack, and it's not all Blackmagic's fault, of course. I'm gonna turn it against the norm here and say I don't really agree with a lot of the videos I've been seeing from other tech channels talking about how basically they've brought over most of the features from DaVinci Resolve to the iPad. I think a pretty crucial set of editing pages has been left out, because with the iPad all you basically have is the cut tab and the color tab, and while yes, the color tab is fully unlocked in many ways, not being able to adjust the timeline view so that you can have just wavelengths at the bottom and you have to select a certain clip and start trimming it for wavelengths to cover up the thumbnails on the timeline, and not being able to zoom out and instead rely on this completely zoomed out timeline view right above your very zoomed in timeline view makes you feel a lot more boxed into the corner, and this is something I feel like could have been easily resolved, no pun intended, through keyboard shortcuts if they allowed Command minus Command plus, but that doesn't do anything here, even though it helps on the Mac version. And I found it bizarre that there are keyboard shortcuts that do work that are over from the Mac, but they're not listed when you hold down the Command key. Like, audio scrubbing took me an insane amount of time to figure out how to turn off, because on most editing software you just have a little button that says, I don't want to hear myself talking in slow motion every time I'm scrubbing across the timeline. This was one of those keyboard shortcuts, Shift Command S I think, but they didn't list it in the tutorial, and there's no button for it elsewhere, so you just have to kind of know that, but it does technically work. It just took a lot longer than it should have. And one of the things I was very excited about to see with DaVinci was letting you not lock the time head in place. This is a big issue I've had with iMovie and LumaFusion, is because it's a touch-dominant operating system. They want the time head to always be in the same place, and then you swipe back and forth with the timeline, and that, in my experience, has made it much harder to edit with, at least as quickly as you can with a dedicated dedicated keyboard and mouse optimized operating system like macOS. But because you can't have like a preview time head go along with you wherever you move your mouse, then it kind of defeats a lot of the advantages of not having a fixed time head, in my opinion. So yes, I am a Final Cut Pro user by default. I'm sorry, a lot of Apple sheep tend to be that way. So if you're a DaVinci Resolve diehard, you're probably not interested in editing on the iPad anyway, considering how many pages they have left out and just the file management system you're stuck with on the iPad, and just having to do everything through a single port. But I still think it's basically the best pro app you can get for the money, considering the free version is very capable, and I will applaud them for not baking in any ads. They could have easily done that, and they actually make it pretty dang hard to upgrade to the $95 one-time in-app purchase for Studio. There's a few features and masks and visual effects and generators that you can add to the timeline that cost money, but you have to specifically find those effects and drag them into your timeline for even the prompt to appear. Most apps that have an in-app purchase love to plaster the paid option all the time. You should upgrade, and sometimes that can get really, really annoying, and the fact that they actually buried this in-app purchase is kind of nice and not so in your face. However, I do still think Blackmagic could do better explaining exactly what is included in the Resolve update, because similar to Mac, you can only export at certain resolutions with the free version, and with my iPad, it only lets you export at 1080p, and also they left out a ton of export settings for the DaVinci Resolve app. It's basically just, do you want a ProRes file or a encoded file, or do you want to upload it to YouTube or Twitter? It was very iMovie-like, whereas I think most people that are using DaVinci Resolve are used to having a lot more customization with their export settings and their bit rates. Even LumaFusion does this better. But again, LumaFusion is not free, and this is. But it's kind of hard to tell when you're using this program on the A12X chip, like, what features are they speccing out in saying you need the M1 iPad to access this feature, versus what features are they pricing out? Like, what things are going to be resolved? Sorry, it's just so easy to work that joke in, but what features are going to be unlocked essentially once I pay for Studio? And I'm going to rely on you guys in the comments that hopefully know a little bit more about it than I do, but I was looking all over their website and through forums and through other YouTubers' reviews, and they don't make it really clear. There's just some visual effects options and masking options that they bake into Studio, but I need like a chart that says specifically you need the M1 chip for this and you need the paid Studio version for this, versus, okay, you just have an older iPad and you're not going to be able to access those features. Not really clear, and I hate to break it to you, Blackmagic, but there's way more people with iPads that don't have M1 chips than people that do, and I guess it's just more likely that the people interested in editing in Resolve are going to have those newer iPads, but I'm sorry, not bringing the editing page over definitely makes it a hard replacement compared to a dedicated MacBook, especially if we're comparing prices here, because my app crashed like crazy. I was live streaming the whole editing process for the members, and it crashed probably 15 times while editing, 4K ProRes footage, which I have edited on my iPad Pro before using LumaFusion. Definitely didn't get as many crashes as this did. So if you want to start comparing, like, well, this could be a decent alternative to, a MacBook, which, by the way, DaVinci Resolve is also a free application for Mac, that pricing and that capability of the software is actually probably gonna beat out the iPad Pro, especially if you want to edit on a larger display. It's 128 gigabytes for the $1,100 12.9-inch iPad. That's not a ton of storage to work with if you're going to be editing lots of video, so you're probably going to want 256 at least. And now you're at a $1,200 iPad, and the keyboard shortcuts are pretty crucial because of how they've designed this. Like, trying to edit in DaVinci Resolve just with the touchscreen got very frustrating to me very quickly, because there's this vague line where if you're dragging from a certain point beneath the iPad, it's trying to, like, click and drag and select multiple clips, but if you go a little bit higher, then you're actually scrubbing back and forth in the timeline. And I wouldn't mind that as much if they had the designated editing page and you could just zoom out and zoom in depending on what you were doing, but they don't let you. And it's very easy to accidentally tap the super zoomed out timeline right at the top, and that gets really confusing and really annoying very quickly. And if you want to select like multiple out of sequence media clips with just the touchscreen, they don't have an option for that. You have to use the mouse and hold down Command to select non-sequential video clips and stuff. So accompanying for that keyboard case, if you want the big one, that's going to be another $400. So before you know it, like this iPad alternative, if you're using it for DaVinci Resolve and color correction and stuff, is really like a $1,600 purchase versus, you know, getting an M1 chip or an M2 chip in a MacBook Air is going to be cheaper. It's going to come with more storage by default, and you're going to get the fully unlocked video editing suite where you actually have all of these options that we're complaining about not having. Plus, you'll have better battery life, more ports. I guess the downside is you won't get mini LED, and you won't get ProMotion or Face ID or cellular support, so I'm in favor of the iPad being a more expensive 2-in-1. I'm not against that. It's just, from the beginning, I feel like once you're putting the same silicon in iPads and Macs, there really shouldn't be these types of software differences. I don't feel like, well, the iPad, because it's small and I guess the battery is a little smaller, it can't handle the editing page. It can't handle zooming in and out and letting you change the timeline view. Like, very basic things that are clearly not limits of just battery life or something. The MacBook Airs don't have fans in them anyway, and they can handle that stuff. There are Intel-based MacBooks way slower than the A12X chip that are still capable of running desktop-class editing software where you have all of these options because they've been there for years. So I guess I've seen a lot of people pitching it online as like, well, this is a great, not necessarily, you know, Final Cut. Maybe that's why Apple doesn't bring Final Cut to the iPad, because this is meant to be a placeholder similar to like Swift Playgrounds on the iPad. You don't get Xcode, but you're a toy. iPads are for kids, so you get to pretend like you have the full editing suite, where in reality, if you really want all of those desktop class features like zooming in and out or selecting different timeline views, well, that you're gonna have to just go for a Mac with that. And I keep seeing people saying, well, this is good if you're just on the go. You need a small device and you're color correcting when you're out in the field and shooting videos real quick, but you'll save all of that color corrected footage to the cloud, and then you can access those same project files on your real editing machine. Okay, I guess that's kind of nifty. It's just a lot of money, in my opinion, to spend on like your stopgap. Like, I don't actually finish my videos on the iPad. I just start them, and then when I get back to the office, I do the real editing work. I'm sure there's some people that can justify spending, you know, $1,400, $1,500 on their pre-color correcting device before they get to their real editor, but I just feel like it's such a missed opportunity when I know that this hardware is capable of doing so much more. And yes, DaVinci Resolve being available on the iPad absolutely increases the functionality. It increases the number of use cases, so I am happy it exists. I'm very grateful that it's free and that so many people who want to do the basic style video editing can do that with the iPad, but I guess the reason I'm not super pumped about it is because it's still following through with that mindset of, well, it's on an iPad, and because the iPad is not a Mac, therefore it has to get less features. It has to get a scaled down version, and I'm sorry, yeah, they are kind of leaving out some pretty crucial features in my opinion, at least for my workflow. Maybe if you're not editing the type of videos that I am, where it's like lots and lots of jump cuts, obviously, and I'm usually editing 1 to 2 videos a day, and I'm trying to edit them as quickly as possible with the extreme efficiency that I'm used to, leaving out features like being able to let your cursor become the razor, so I don't have to do a keyboard shortcut every time I cut the clip, or it's even worse if you don't have a keyboard and mouse, and now you gotta press the cut button every time you get the time head to where you want to split the clip. That makes editing processes take way longer, and I just don't believe that the iPad should have those inherent limitations. Well, because it has to be touchscreen optimized, we have to leave out a bunch of things, and we have to get rid of a bunch of buttons and views because then it gets, I don't know, too complicated, or the app gets too bloated or something. But at the same time, they're very comfortable optimizing software just for M1 iPads, and a lot of features only work if you have the keyboard and mouse anyway, which is why, to me, making the stretch of dual boot macOS so that I could actually access the official release of DaVinci Resolve and not have any of these limitations, that would be better, because I know the hardware is capable of running it because MacBook Airs exist. And if someone does want to make their iPad their primary editing machine, I don't think there should be those software limitations. And I know that the use cases, especially for people who have older iPads that are just gonna wake up now and be like, oh, cool, I have a free editing application that has way more color correcting tools than iMovie or LumaFusion, and there's good masking and tracking features that you can access as well, so increases the usefulness of existing iPads. But to me, I'm still gonna be wanting more as long as there's some kind of software supported reason for my MacBook to be capable of doing things that this can't. I appreciate what Blackmagic has done because the crashes are so consistent for me, and I know that long term this is not going to be a more efficient workflow workflow for me. I am unfortunately not going to be using DaVinci Resolve on the iPad all too often, and I think while it's great for a lot of the basic video editing stuff, that kind of use case kind of already existed. Like, I don't think it unlocks a bunch more use cases that LumaFusion didn't already unlock, but I guess this is the free version, so that makes it more accessible. But essentially, I hope with software updates in the future, they can eventually get DaVinci Resolve to identical to the use cases and the usability with software and features to the Mac version. But until you give me the editing page and let me just zoom out or adjust timeline views and basic stuff like that, I'm gonna have a hard time saying this is a decent alternative to just buying a cheaper MacBook with more storage, more ports, better battery life that can access the same software except way better for less money. Like, if that's your goal, is to save money by not buying a Mac, then the iPad you have to buy is gonna cost more than the Mac and the software is not gonna be as good. So that absolutely has kind of damaged my recommendation on it, even though I do still think it's a great app and I'm very happy it exists, and I do think a lot of people will make use with it. How do you guys feel about DaVinci Resolve on iPad? Have you tried it? Is it stable on your iPad? Am I totally wrong? Feel free to let me know down in the comments below. And thank you to everyone supporting this channel directly with Tailosive Tech Pro. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I'll see you all in the next one.